So today we're going to begin reading through Deuteronomy in our summer Hebrew reading. And I'm going to start here with verse 1 of chapter 1. We're going to just sort of walk through this verse and talk a little bit about what we may recognize, what we may not recognize, and just a few tips for reading biblical Hebrew in BHS because the text here, as you can probably tell, is a little bit different than what you have seen in your grammar. You'll note that there are a lot of extra markings that you're not used to seeing. Aside from the letters and the vowels, there are a bunch of other marks throughout the text here. And these are usually accent marks, which we'll talk a little bit about. The two primary accent marks that you need to be aware of right now are the atnach. That's this. It looks like an inverted tuning fork here. In your BHS, it probably looks more like just the top of an arrow instead of being rounded. It's probably just, a triangle without a base. That's the atnach. The atnach marks the midway point in the verse. Not necessarily by length, but in turn, the conceptual midpoint. So think of it as like a semicolon or a major comma or something like that in the verse. And then the other punctuation mark you need to be aware of is the sof pasuk. The sof pasuk is this colon looking thing, except instead of two dots, it's really kind of two diamonds, sort of, two squares rotated. This is the marker for the end of the verse. You can think of this as a period, but a lot of times when you have a full Hebrew verse, when you translate that into English, you'll end up with more than one sentence. And so sometimes the aknach can serve as a period, sometimes the sof pasuk. But, excuse me, know that this sof pasuk here at the end, this is the marker of the end of a verse. And this little vertical, I wish I could turn off these. I probably can, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. This little vertical line next to the kamets here, this is called a saluk. And the saluk always goes on the final word of the verse on whatever syllable is accented. Okay, so be aware of that mark as well, the saluk. It doesn't really do a whole lot. What you'll learn later on is that the atnach and the saluk can sometimes affect the vowel length of a word, but we don't need to get into that right now. I just want you to know that each verse ends with the sof pasuk, and the saluk will be on the accented syllable of the last word of the verse. And then the atnach, that's going to mark the conceptual midpoint of the verse. All of these other accent marks you can disregard for now. We may talk about them more as we go through, but I just wanted to give you sort of that orientation right now. So looking at verse 1 here, let's just look through and see what we recognize. Now, unfortunately, when I teach Hebrew, I often teach the Elementary Hebrew 1 and Elementary Hebrew 2 courses, both of those semesters. I often teach them at the same time. So it's hard for me to remember always what concepts are covered in which semester, but I'm going to do my best. There are several here that I'm certain you've had, and others that I'm not sure whether you've had it or not. And then there's other material that I know we haven't seen yet. The first one, let's just talk about this first word here, Ela. Now, I feel like you've probably had this, but I'm not certain. So let me go to the vocabulary here and look at when we would have learned Ela. Ela comes in chapter or lesson 16. So I actually believe this is the very first lesson of second semester. We may have just covered that at the end of first semester. I can't really remember. But Ela, you will learn, this is the demonstrative pronoun. Remember, a demonstrative pronoun, think of that as a pointing pronoun. A demonstrative pronoun, and sometimes this is referred to as a demonstrative adjective as well. The only difference between those two, whether it's demonstrative pronoun or a demonstrative adjective, the only difference is the way it's functioning in the sentence. So I think of Ela as an adjective. And just like any adjective, it can be attributive. So here, because it means these, we could say, these books, that would be attributive. Which books? These books. Or it can be substantival. Substantival would be these are the books. Okay? So if it's substantival, we refer to it as a demonstrative pronoun. There, the word these is functioning as a pronoun. But here, we've got we'll call it the demonstrative. This is the near demonstrative. There are two types of demonstratives. There are near demonstratives, this or these, and there are far demonstratives, that or those. You can see how, depending on whether it's near or far, it's pointing either to a near location, this book, right here, or it's pointing far away, that book or those books. I think I remember from Spanish class that Spanish actually has 3 levels of demonstrative. There's a near demonstrative, aquí, um, and then there is allá, I want to say, or allí, and I can't remember the other one, but one is like far and one is like remote, like even farther or something like that. So each language is unique in the way that it works, but the demonstratives in Hebrew are very similar to the English demonstratives. Something to keep in mind that Ela is common in gender. That means the form is identical whether it's referring to feminine nouns or masculine nouns. So you don't have to learn 2 different forms with Ela depending on gender. They're both the same. Ela is always plural, and it's used for both masculine and feminine, so it's easy to remember. So we have these as our first word here. Now, is this functioning attributively or is this functioning substantively? Well, just like any adjective, we can determine that with a combination of, let's call it syntax and context. So what I mean by syntax is, what is its relationship to, maybe morphology is a better word here. What is the relationship to its noun, to the noun that it's modifying? The noun that it's modifying presumably is going to be plural, and we can't tell from Ela whether it's masculine or feminine, but as we look through here, we have a noun right next to us that happens to be plural. It's masculine plural, but this would be a good candidate for the noun that Ela is modifying. If we look at this word here, we can start, I guess the first thing that I notice is the hirik yod mem suffix. All right, so I'm going to take that off and just note that this is masculine plural. And then I'm left with ha davar. Okay, so davar here, this is the word for word. We usually see it as dalet kametz beit kametz resh, but here we've reduced the first kametz in order to make room for the hirik yod mem suffix. All right, so this is the noun davar. It means word, matter, thing, very broad scope of meaning, and it's plural. Now, not only is it plural, it's also definite. We've got the definite article, the hey, patach, and the dagesh in the first root letter. So we have the word, the words, right here. The reason why I point out that this is definite is because Ela is not definite. Ela does not have the definite article. All right, and so generally speaking, when our adjective does not match the definiteness of its noun, that's going to usually be a predicative relationship, which is where we have to supply an English to be verb there. So we would say, these are the words. All right? So that's the first phrase here. This is going to serve as our noun phrase, our subject. These are the words. Well, the words is our subject. These, actually, these would be our subject. The words would be our predicate nominative. Again, you'll learn more about predicate, if that doesn't sound familiar from English grammar and syntax, you'll learn that in second year Hebrew, where nouns have different roles within a sentence. So here, this is actually a verbless clause, and the entire sentence could be reduced to Ela ha devarim. These are the words. Everything else in this sentence, all of the rest of this, is just describing which words we're talking about. These are the words. Well, which words are they? They are the words which, and then it's going to describe it more. So, this is the main part of our sentence here. Ela hedevarim, and actually in Hebrew, the name of the book, we get Deuteronomy from the Greek word for this book, which is Deuteronomium, and actually that's Latin, so that must come from the Latinization of the Greek here. But this basically comes from two Greek words, deuteros, which means second, and nomos, which means law. And of course, in Deuteronomy, this is the second giving of the law. Moses gives the law to the people of Israel at Mount Sinai in Exodus. And then during the wilderness wanderings, the generation that left Egypt becomes disobedient and doesn't trust God to provide for them, and so they are condemned to die in the wilderness, and only their offspring will enter into the promised land. And so now that they've made it to the promised land, Moses is giving the covenant, the law of God, to this new generation who was not of age at Sinai. That's why we call this Deuteronomy. Well, you'll note here the Hebrew word for this book is devarim. Okay? That comes from this word right here, ele hadevarim. All right, so these are the words. Which words are they? These are the words which, or these are the words that. Diber. Okay, this is something we haven't seen before. Diber is a particular form of a verb. The root here is dalet beit resh, and if that looks familiar, that's because it's the same root that the noun davar comes from. As a verb, davar means he spoke or to speak. And this is in a particular stem or pattern of verbs referred to as the PL pattern. And we will learn more about the PL pattern in second semester. All we need to know right now is that this basically means he spoke. So these are the words which he spoke. Which who spoke? Moshe. All right, Moshe. This is the Hebrew name Moses, or the Hebrew name for Moses. Moshe spoke these words. To whom did he speak them? El Kol Yisrael. To all of Israel. These are the words which Moses spoke to all of Israel. Where did he speak them to all of Israel? Be'ever ha-Yordan, ha-Yardain. Be'ever ha-Yardain. Okay, so this is our bait preposition. It's going, because Aver ha-Yardain is a place, it's a location. This bait is going to have a locative force, a locational force. And usually when that's the case, we translate bait either as in or at. So these are the words which Moses spoke to all of Israel at Ever ha-Yardain. Okay, Yardain here, this is the word for the Jordan River. And Aver, this is a little tricky to translate, but Aver ha-Yardain refers to the area opposite the land of Israel to the Jordan. So let me try to pull this up here in, let me see if I can find a good, use my map resource here. Atlas, rather. There we go. Atlas. And I'm going to just, well, I'll just use what we have. All right, so let's zoom back out here. All right, so obviously Israel leaves Egypt. However they get through this, wherever they leave from, there's a lot of suggestions. But wherever they leave from, they end up wandering in the wilderness. And then what we get here in the land of Israel, Land of Israel basically goes from about here to about here. Above this, this is going to be referred to as Syria, Assyria. Some of this is Phoenicia, that sort of a thing. But basically, this area here is the area of Israel, and we can call all of it Israel because these are the different tribes and where they settle. But this is the Dead Sea. This is the Sea of Galilee. And basically, Israel is over in this area. Okay, so if this is Israel, then this is the area opposite Israel. This has historically been referred to as the Transjordan, which basically means it's across the Jordan. Across the Jordan from what? Well, across the Jordan from Israel. It's a very Israel-centric way of naming it, but it was referred to as the Transjordan. When this became its own nation after the First World War, this basically was named the Kingdom of Jordan, okay, rather than Transjordan. So this is the current modern day Kingdom of Jordan over here. But it is an area that has been referred to as the Transjordan. Before that, in ancient Rome and ancient Greece, it was referred to as the Peron. Peron is a Greek word that means across. So just like Transjordan, this is the area across the Jordan from Israel. And so when we look at our word here, Aver, this comes from a Hebrew root, avar, ayin beit resh, which basically means to pass over or to pass through. And so this is just saying the other side, beyond the Jordan River. So these are the words which Moses spoke to all of Israel at the beyond of the Jordan. So at the area that was beyond the Jordan. Then we get another description here. Ba midbar. So ba midbar, we have the bait preposition again. It's got the sign of the definite article. We've got a patak and a dagesh. So this is in the. Midbar is the word for wilderness, basically. Midbar can be desert, it can be wilderness. Generally, it's an uninhabited area. Okay, so in the wilderness, again, we've got another, next video I'll have these little windows turned off, but in the Arabah or Arava. Okay, so Arava, this is a Hebrew noun that refers to a specific geographical location, but etymologically speaking, it's probably the word from which we get modern day. Let me back up a whole bunch here. Modern day Saudi Arabia. Okay, Arabia, Arabic, Arab, all of these come from the Semitic root Arav, and here it's a particular geographical region known as the Arava. Okay, so that's what we're referring to here. In the Arava, so in Arabia, it wouldn't become known as Arabia until much later, but in Arabia, the Zaha. Oh, sorry, I skipped the line. In Arabia, mole. This usually functions as a preposition. It can stand in as a noun for like the front, but mole usually means like opposite or in front of or facing, something like that. Suf is just another geographical term. This is a location. So facing Suf or in front of Suf. All right. So these are the words which Moses spoke to all of Israel at the place beyond the Jordan, in the wilderness, in the Arava, in front of or opposite Suf. We've got an even more detailed description. Bain, this is another preposition. This basically means between. And one of the idioms of Hebrew, one of the unique things about the way Hebrew uses the preposition that we basically our equivalent of between, is we would usually say like between Nebraska and Oklahoma for Kansas, or between Kansas and Illinois for Missouri. We would have between A and B. But the way that Hebrew structures it, they usually say between A and between B. They repeat this preposition. All right, so you don't need to repeat this in your own translation. Here we have Bain Paran Uvein Tofer. So Bain Paran Uvein Tofer. Tofel. I'm saying Tofer. Tofel here. So this is basically saying between Paran and Tofel. You don't need to repeat that second Bain. And even further description. So between Paran and Tofel and Lavan and Hatzerot and Di Zahav. All right, so when we have between, and we have, it's not just between two things, but between, we've got 5 here. Between Paran and Tofel and Lavan and Hazarot and Di Hazav, this is probably charting out sort of a circular area around, maybe like a circumference around them, because it's between so many different things. But this is just another way of narrowing down where specifically Israel is. All right, so that's sort of an unorthodox sentence. It's got a lot of geographical information, but I wanted to walk through that with you just because the grammar is really simple, and hopefully that continues through in the rest of what we're going to look at in Deuteronomy. Again, the primary thing that you're unfamiliar with is going to be vocabulary, but then we've also got a peek at the PL stem, which we will get to in second semester. So if this is interesting to you, if you want to keep going, I'll probably do at least a couple of these a week because we're only doing one verse. But if you want to keep going with us, then hit subscribe, and I will make sure that we do this somewhat consistently. Like at least once a week is what we're going to need to do to actually keep this stuff fresh in our minds. But hope you'll join us.